Thank you for joining me on our continued study of Get Wisdom. Don't forget you can purchase your own copy of Get Wisdom on Ron's website. That's getwisdom.us, or you can go to amazon.com. Glad to He'd be glad to hear from you. Get a copy of that so you can understand what's going on. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the philosophy of education. And continuing on with chapter 2, which we should finish tonight. Chapter 2 should be finished tonight. We'll be getting on to chapter 3 next week. So we'll be looking forward to moving ahead on this. It's some very interesting things we're going to see under the philosophy of education. Philosophy of education is the collection of principles which govern our understanding and practice of education. What collection of truths governs the educational process? The philosophy of education is formed through the self-conscious reasoning of principles which ought to govern education. From where do those principles derive? Christian philosophy of education, as we have already suggested, a Christian philosophy of education is the understanding of the principles of education governed by the gospel and its purposes. For the Christian, everything begins and ends with the person and teaching of Christ, including education. What are the gospel purposes of education? In other words, what does God expect of any individual in his Great Commission assignment? Is there any present fruit which ought to come in this life because of the gospel? Is there any eternal consequence of the gospel? Can one learn what these are and be better prepared to receive them? Jesus said, "Learn from me." We will here continue to attempt to do so. American Christian philosophy of education. What will distinguish an American Christian philosophy of education? Excuse me, let me start again. What will distinguish an American Christian philosophy of life and education? An American Christian philosophy of education addresses the biblical principles of education, which history uniquely produced in America, God's work through people and events. We can identify a number of principles related to America's heritage of particular blessings and responsibilities. We have a covenant individuality, Christian liberty and self-government, Christian character, stewardship, biblical forms for Christian activities, the foundational institutions necessary to spread the gospel of the cross, brotherly love, and covenantal union with others to accomplish our God-given purposes. These principles, discovered by Verna Hall and Rosalie Slater, and known as the 7 Principles of American Christian History and Government, represent the seed, if you will, of Get Wisdom. They also represent our largely forgotten heritage. They will be expanded shortly. From these principles, we will build a detailed and practical biblical philosophy and method of education. By way of summary, if it is biblical to have a philosophy of life's subjects, then we should have a philosophy for teaching and learning which belongs to Christ and his gospel purpose, and which reflects the particular gifts and responsibilities which God has given to us as American Christians for the rebuilding of the foundational institutions which support and promote the gospel. The philosophy is summarized in the 7 Principles of American Christian History and Government. We will now move to the next part of Chapter 2, the contrast with a pagan philosophy. Consider a brief contrast of the American Christian to a pagan philosophy. When men neglect the mind of Christ, out of our sinful bent, we tend to form a natural or, in historical terms, a pagan philosophy of education. By pagan, we mean a view of reality which excludes the personal and true God, and which makes man the center of his own existence. The natural man in history, with variations, forms a consistent view of the universe. A pagan view usually provides for nature worship because it admits that man is subject to the forces of nature. These forces of nature are God. Nonetheless, this surrender in a religious sense to nature is merely a cover for the deep internal desire for personal sovereignty. In practice, pagan man desires to be God, nature in the form of God, or as a specific force in the case of modern man, is only to be appeased. And we're seeing this throughout the world, and even sadly to say in churches, that we are gods. And that is, it is a paganistic, Gnostic thought that is in there today. So to establish this sovereignty, the more powerful members in any group will subjugate the less powerful. In practice, pagan man desires to be God. Nature, in the form of a god, or a scientific force, in the case of modern man, is only to be appeased. Nature or God is ordinarily appeased through the reduction of the people under a priestly caste or a powerful governmental or military clique. In every culture where paganism is the rule, that society grows increasingly debased, and tyranny needs to increase. And tyranny tends to increase. Except by the providence of God and his involvement in the history of man, we would expect complete degeneration. Consider the Greek and Roman heroes of the classical biography Plutarch's Lives. Not one of these great figures of classical antiquity died a natural death. The capricious tyranny of the masses or of the elite cost everyone his life when the beloved and revered leader no longer served the interests of power. And I had to do some looking up on Plutarch's Lives. He wrote essays, he wrote history. He later became a priest of Apollo in Delphi, which, that in and of itself, you could watch some of my programs on that, we'll address it. But he was trying to find a way to combine the mythical characters of Greek and Roman heroes, explaining their similarities and differences. We admittedly do find in the various cultures the memory of an early godliness through the sons of Noah, an innate knowledge of the true God, however suppressed. This memory does exhibit a conservative effect on most cultures. Some even maintain a remarkably Christian character. This fact will not be surprising to the one who remembers that culture did not rise from the slime, but fell from the glory of creation through sin. Society started high and declined, not the other way around. Society continues to decline except where the Lord interjects himself into history. Nonetheless, the rule remains. Paganism debases a people. I'm going to say that again. Paganism debases a people. A contemporary pagan philosophy of life appears as man-centered. There is no such thing as sin to correct. And we're seeing that so much in every area of life. So let the child do what he feels. If it feels good, do it. Just let the kid do what he wants. This also stems from witchcraft and Satanism, which says, "Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." So it's definitely man-centered, overtly governing his ability and inhibits innate creativity. Evolutionary. There are no more objective morals or values. If they have a paganistic viewpoint, a philosophy with evolution, so there are no objective morals or values, only what society wants at the time. Man is evolving towards a higher quality of life without internal effort through selection, through racism, may accelerate the process. And you see this in so many science fiction shows, especially like in Star Trek, where certain races or beings evolved higher than for the need of corporeal bodies. So yeah, that philosophy has been around a while. Environmental. The environment is the primary cause of success or failure. The individual has no control. Such an attitude parallels Homer's blaming of the gods for evils among men. Provide the proper environment and the right results will follow. But who decides what the right environment is? And we've seen this a lot. I mean, people have taken, yeah, you provide the right environment and the success will follow, and the right results will follow. Well, we don't see that. When you let a child, going back to the beginning here, under man centered, you let the child do what he feels, well, unfortunately, if we've, remember Adam and Eve lived in a perfect scenario and they sinned. Other pagan philosophies of life will appear as naturalistic. The individual is the complete mercy of nature, is at the complete mercy of nature. If he does not learn easily, he is an evolutionary throwback. There is something inherently wrong with him. The principle of the survival of the fittest would place the quick-witted elite to rule over the more evolutionary retarded common folk. Socialistic. There is no inherent value of the individual as a child of God. Society alone matters, the social government. See that with Hillary. It takes a village. A ruling class of intellectuals over the masses is needed to achieve that proper social or economic, etc. environment. Therefore, civil socialism is the goal. Keep the masses subdued by appealing to their flesh. Keep them pacified with materialism, thereby having material security and pleasure. Escapism, warfare. Otherwise, use coercion to keep them under domination. Do not give them the tools to defend themselves. Do not equip them to be able-minded and independent, lest they endanger the social program. The elite, translated the strongest, know what is best for all. Fragmentary, to disorient the would-be independent thinker as a direct outgrowth of the ideas of evolution. The pagan philosophy of education results in the fragmentation of subjects. Evolutionism promotes fragmentation by maintaining that everything originated from a random chaos. Randomness is ultimate. To admit an essential order is to admit meaning. To admit meaning in the universe as a whole is to infer God, an unacceptable alternative. Therefore, no wholeness or harmony of constituents is pursued. Even within a single discipline, such as mathematics, a college math major, my professor made no attempt I can recall to reconcile the departments of mathematics. Such fragmentation hinders ultimate mastery. Sense-oriented, because there is no spiritual or original source for life, no internal source. All learning is sensual. One must experience everything for himself, both good and bad. The pagan philosophy, as it bears on education and other human endeavors, may be termed institutionalized sin. Sin directs the ungoverned flesh. The way of the flesh, as an internal principle, always results in some outward expression, and sin never stays put. A Christian internal character would form a distinctive outward manifestation. So will the pagan character. A complete set of ungodly institutions, an excuse to curse God and justify sin, will be the external result of the latter principle. For example, consider that one of the obvious outward results of the faith of a Taoist is pure laziness. Now, perhaps the word idol and idol have more in common than meets the ear. So, in conclusion, philosophy is a collection of truths. God is the only source of truth since he is the author of every part of reality. In that case, should not all subjects help to equip us to live for God's glory and a plan directing us to him as the only authoritative source for all our ideas? Should we not take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ so that excellence is the result? Consider this exhortation unto reflection and self examination called Little Things by Julia Fletcher Carney. Little drops of water, little grains of sand, make the mighty ocean and the pleasant land. So the little moments, humble though they be, make the mighty ages of eternity. So the little errors lead the soul away from the paths of virtue, far in sin to stray. Little deeds of kindness, little words of love, help to make earth happy, like the heaven above. And that concludes Chapter 2 of Get Wisdom, Making Christian Heroes of Ordinary People, which you can obtain on Rob's website, which is getwisdom.us, or amazon.com. Now, next week, we'll be studying the 7 principles of American Christian heritage, the personal principles. So join us next week, and don't forget to tune in on Saturday. Also, don't forget to like and share this video. Hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. That's very important because that will help get the gospel out and these truths out. Well, thank you for joining me here today. We will see you next week. God bless.